Okay, guys, this is the start of your Unit 1 notes. As you can see, I'm not here today, so this is the best way that I have for you to take the notes without us getting too far behind. So just on your notepad, write down Unit 1 notes. As I go through here, I am going to go way too fast for you to be able to write. So the idea is that you will hit pause whenever you need to finish writing, and then hit play again to listen to me talk some more. So have your headphones in and write stuff down and hit pause and play as necessary. Okay, here we go. Unit 1 notes, goals and jobs. There are 5 goals in psychology. The goals are to explain, observe, control, predict, and describe human behavior. It's all related to human behavior. Psychology is intended to explain human behavior, intended to observe it, intended to control it, in some cases predict it, and in other cases just describe it, but it's all talking about human behavior. So your second bullet point is what psychologists do. We're going to talk about some different jobs in the field of psychology and some things that you might be interested in. The first job is a psychiatrist. Psychiatrists are medical doctors who specialize in the treatment of psychological problems and who can prescribe medication. That's the biggest point about them, is that they are doctors who can prescribe medication. A psychologist is a doctor who applies their knowledge of psychology directly to the research or to the client, and they cannot prescribe medication. So, psychiatrist can prescribe medication, psychologist cannot prescribe medication. A clinical psychologist is the largest group of psychologists. These people are going to help with problems like anxiety, depression, milder forms of DID. DID is dissociative identity disorder, which is formerly known as multiple personality disorder. If a person has that, multiple personalities, and they're under control, they might just see a clinical psychologist once a week to try to, make sure things are going well for them. The clinical psychologists mainly work in a clinical setting. That's how they got their name. So they would work in things like hospitals, prisons, college and university clinics, as well as some private practices. A counseling psychologist will treat people who have adjustment problems rather than serious psychological disorders. They're often employed by school districts, universities, and businesses. This is the second largest group of psychologists overall. Adjustment problems are going to be, you literally have problems adjusting to things. So, for example, you moved from a new school and you're having trouble with that change, or your parents just got divorced and you're having trouble with that, or somebody close to you just died that was your main caretaker. Those are adjustment problems. They are situational. They're not going to last forever. You're not going to have to see this person long term, just until you can kind of get back on your feet. A school psychologist is not what our counselors are here at school. In fact, a counseling psychologist isn't that either. We have one school psychologist. Her name is Dr. Bischoff. Her job is to help identify students who are having problems. They're usually hired by the district, and they can actually make diagnoses by observations and testing. So Dr. Bischoff can actually test kids for special needs, whether that be on the low end of the spectrum. They need notes taken for them, they need help with reading, stuff like that, or on the high end of the spectrum, maybe they are advanced and gifted students and need some additional resources that way. So she can make determinations inside the school. Now we have a big district, so we actually have one school psychologist per high school, but at a lot of smaller districts there would just be one school psychologist per the entire district. Also, if there's a tragedy in the school, like if one of our students dies, or something like that, they would bring in other school psychologists to help people deal with those problems. An educational psychologist is going to be confusing for you because it's not a school psychologist and it's not a counseling psychologist. The educational psychologists are going to look at the big picture concerning education. So the whole idea about having block scheduling, that came from educational psychologists. The people who are arguing what time we should start school, which honestly high schoolers should start at the time elementary school starts, and they should switch that. Middle school should stay the same, according to research. But educational psychologists are the ones who are arguing about those type of things and looking at the big picture concerning education as a whole. A developmental psychologist studies the changes that occur during your lifespan. So they're going to watch people over a long period of time. That was not a real bell. They study physical, cognitive, and social development, and they research things like the nature versus nurture conflict. So the developmental psychologists are going to look at people and things over a long period of time, and they're going to look at especially the physical, cognitive, and social development of people. Consumer psychologist is really a neat job. Consumer psychologists are the ones who study the behavior of shoppers. They are hired by every single industry, and they make a big difference. For example, consumer psychologists studied what different colors mean in your brain. And so McDonald's, their number, they have two colors. They are red and gold, and we all know that. So red and gold, those particular shades of red and gold, indicate in our brains fast and cheap. So when we're thinking, oh, I want to go somewhere, I need something quick, I need something cheap, our brain associates those colors with those things, and McDonald's is our answer for our choice for dinner. That's also a life lesson for you, girls, what not to wear to a club. Grocery stores. If you think about the layout of any grocery store, if you stay on the outside of any grocery store that you walk into, you just walk all the way around the outside, that's everything you need to survive. It's bread, it's meat, it's dairy products, it's fruits and vegetables. But because everything else that you don't need to survive is up and down the aisles, that's how they get the layout. That's how they make more sales. Also, putting things right by the registers, those are impulse buys. That is a consumer psychologist who came up with those ideas. If people are hungry in that moment, they'll grab a Snickers bar, they'll grab whatever right here on their way out, even though they just bought a whole cart full of things. So consumer psychologist is really cool. Study the behavior of shoppers. Forensic psychologist is something that I think interests a lot of you. These people work in or with the criminal justice system. They can be criminal profilers, like on the show Criminal Minds, or behavioral scientists. They are trying to analyze crime patterns before the next crime is committed and try to figure out how they can stop future crimes. Industrial psychologist is also pretty cool. If you like to shop, this is something that would maybe interest you. They are employed by business firms to get better productivity out of workers. The IO-Psy here, that stands for industrial/organizational psychologist. They will look at things like lighting, vacation times, workspace, colors, etc. So when planning a new building, they would come in and look at something and say, okay, we need to have a women's restroom here and a men's restroom here. We need to also put them down here. When they come into an existing workplace, they will watch the business for a while and they'll say, you know what, if we just moved the coffee pot over here instead, you'd have people taking a lot less time to go and get a refill of coffee. They'd get back to their work faster, and more productivity equals more money for the company. So that's what they're hired to do. Also, things like chairs and stuff they get to buy stuff like that so that they can keep you more productive longer. If your chair is uncomfortable for you to sit in, then you're not going to be able to stay and work as long as if your chair is nice and comfortable. So that's what industrial psychologists do. Experimental psychologists are going to focus on biological changes concerning things like hormones in the bloodstream, psychological events such as anxiety and depression. They are actually trying to figure out what is biologically or chemically happening in the body. And these people, experimental psychologists, are going to work with drug companies to try to create the new drug for anxiety or depression or whatever that might be. That's what they look at, the experimental psychologist. A therapist is not technically a doctor. They could get a doctorate in it, but they are not technically a doctor. Therapist is to a nurse practitioner as a psychologist is to doctors. So a nurse practitioner, they go to school a little bit less time than your doctor does. They can still see you privately. They can make recommendations. Ultimately, they cannot prescribe medication. They would not be able to do that without a doctor's approval. But that's what a nurse practitioner does. That's the same thing that a therapist does in the world of mental health. And therapists actually usually carry out the doctor's orders. They have a lot more patient contact. So maybe you would go see a psychiatrist once, and the psychiatrist would recommend that you go see a therapist twice a week or once a week for 3 months, and then come back to the doctor and see how things are going. Okay, that is the end of the notes. Hopefully you got that figured out, and as soon as I can figure out how to end this, there we go. All right, I will see you guys next class period. Be ready for your vocab test. Thank you. Goodbye.